As part of my recent visit to a city in Spain called Jerez de la Frontera, I met Mauricio Lorente, co-owner of Lorente y Barba winemakers and exporters of sherry. Mauricio asked our group of travel writers to tell him a little bit about ourselves. Not only was he interested to know who he was going to be spending the afternoon with, but he wanted to make sure he was going to be addressing each of our particular areas of writing focus, which was very considerate of him. What we didn't yet know was that as we rode through his vineyard in a horse-drawn cart, no less, Mauricio was going to be a wealth of wonderful information for all of us, including covering history, scientific details, and a great family history. I'm Courtney Drake McDonough, host of the Real Food Traveler podcast and publisher of the realfoodtraveler.com website. And my guest today is part of the lineage of sherry in Jerez de la Frontera, Spain, the birthplace of the wine, with a unique history and method of creation. So welcome, Mauricio. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have so good remembers of the time you were here. I enjoyed it very much.
It was such a wonderful afternoon and such a beautiful setting, and it was a great day. It was a great day, and I'm grateful that you're able to take the time to do this podcast with me so that all of our listeners and our readers can get sort of a feel until they can go visit you of what you're about and your business and sherry in general. So let's start by having you tell us how you came to be in the sherry making business.
Well, for me, it's somehow been a part of my family, and I grew up in a family where my father was pharmacist, and he performed clinical analysis, and also he was also interested in wine. He had a bodega. He was a wine producer and produced wine who usually was sold to bigger firms who commercialized it. So he sold to big owners, but he was a good producer, and I worked with it since I was a child. I helped my father at the vineyard, and I also went many times at the bodega, and it's something that went somehow familiar with me. So I studied medicine, and I always liked trying cherries and knowing about different kinds, and I always enjoyed it and showed it to my friends. Most of the friends I have had have known sherry. If those who were not from this town have known sherry through me, and it's something I have always been very proud of. And so when my father died, I inherited some sherry barrels and wine cellar, and I started thinking, well, what can I do with this? Because I was not going to do it as my father did, who sold it to bigger firms. So I thought, well, I had too much for myself, and maybe nearly too little for selling. So I started making with my partner Julio. We decided to make a small firma and to produce wine. So started doing, okay, how would we like to have how we would like our sherries to be, and we started. The first thing we did was started making sherry, and then many years after we started selling it. So for me it was something very how do I say it, something that was not a work for me. It was somehow my passion, and I was very delighted to do it, because it's something I wanted to do with the wines I have that I loved very much and have a lot of significance for me. So I said, well, this has a lot of meaning. I have a lot of remembers of these kinds of wine, and I want to make the best I can from what I have. And I started having these the wines I had for my father. I use them as the oldest kinds, and I started making, this system we have here, of which we will talk about later. So how can I make a regular production out of the wines I have? And 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 it's something that I have very slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we started selling it to restaurants and to some wine clubs, and it's going. I'm really happy on how far it has already gone. I'm very, how say, I'm very happy of seeing how it is working. But for me, it's somehow it's not a hobby, because it's something. Of course, it's a business, but it is something that has a lot to do with my passion and what I like to do. So it's something I started as what can I do with this thing I have that I love, and it started in a part-time job, I would say.
I bet your father would be so happy.
Yeah, that's what my mother usually says. Hey, I guess he would have seen this.
Yeah, yeah. Now, making sherry is not your day job. What do you do for your main profession?
Well, I am a forensic doctor. I mean, it means I work for the courts here in my town in Jerez, Sherry, and also in this province in Cadiz. And that is my main job. So I study medicine and I work as a forensic doctor. So forensic medicine space is somehow, in US you have the coroner. That somehow in Spain we have the forensic office in which some we are some doctors that work there, and I have also been working for the university here in Cadiz. I've been a professor at the Faculty of Medicine for 15 years. I stopped this year because somehow I thought I could not do more things. So I said, well, where should I cut? So I still collaborate with the department. I teach lessons about forensic medicine, but my day job is as a forensic doctor.
Okay. Because you have that job, how are you able to balance the medical job with your work with Lorente y Barba? And is your family involved in the business too?
Well, as I said before, somehow I take Lorente y Barba as if I had a part-time job as well. So my medical job is somehow very scheduled. I have the times I have to work, my work in the body for Lorente y Barba is more flexible, and it has even though it's a part-time job, it's a part-time job with a lot of passion. I think uh, I can put the hours that I want in the moments that I have. So it's somehow easy for me, and also because I have the comprehension of my family. So my partner in this business, Lorente Barba, is Lorente. That's me, and Barba is my partner. That's Julio Barba. So he's now also my friend, but we have a good connection. And he also have another job. So we both of us have this as something uh, that is not our income, our most important income in our families and houses. So, and it makes it, but it helps us also that we do not depend on this that much. So we want to do things as well as we can. Our goal is to have to produce a sherry we love, and it's not that we don't have that need of growing that fast. And of course, somehow when you have something that takes so much time and this kind of enterprise does, your family has to be involved. I mean, well, you knew Stefania and you knew it at the vineyard because she helps me always, and she somehow is more a businesswoman, and I'm somehow, I could say, I'm the creative, the passionate part of the team as well. Julio as well. Julio is a great connoisseur, and he knows everything about how the controls, the taxes, and everything of the wine firma is much more complicated than you may think. So something that you do because something that it's made for human consumption, and it has, of course, lots of controls, and it's a product that you sell, so it has controls from the industry, healthcare, and everything. It has a lot of things that have to be put together so that it can work and you can have a product at your arms, at your lips. And even though it has lots of work at the wine yard, at the wine cellar, and the bottling, there are many procedures that have to come one after another, all in order so you can have a good product at the end.
hmm And we as the consumer just get to enjoy it. We don't have to think about all the business side of things like you
No,
do.
of course, of course, of course. But it happens with everything. I think every time, once you have an idea of something you want to do and you start thinking of there are many steps that have to come one after another so that you can have a product sold, and it has a lot of controls and a lot of procedures, everything. For my experience in this, okay, I'm a doctor. I'm familiarized with some other things, but when you think about having a product, everything takes lots of decisions, and every time you make a decision, it's like, okay, you open a door, and there are again 4 doors again. You have to choose which one to follow. And for example, for me, it's interesting, and it has been. I have really enjoyed the journey from the beginning until now. But everything, if you have to choose which kind of bottle do you want, which kind of how you want the wine to look, how do you want it, and you okay, how do you want to produce it? How I want to have a wine that is older, younger, stronger, softer, and everything. There are so many details. And when you, I don't know, for example, when you have a cask of wine, you say, okay, it's a cask, it's made of oak tree, but it's not as simple. If you have to choose which kind of oak do you want. Here we usually use American oak trees, and how do you want it to be? If you want it, because oak barrels are burned inside, you can have it more burn, less burn, and it changes somehow the taste of the wine. You have to choose that, I mean, according to how you want it to taste. And you use some wines to you cannot put sherry directly in the barrel. You have to use a sherry so that the wine absorbs somehow the taste of the oak, that it's not so strong. And there are lots of decisions, and it's really interesting. And if you like what you are doing, you enjoy the process. But when you start some kind of business, I think, I don't know, my experience is that you do not expect how many decisions there are, how much work there is after you decide to start something. Well, something like that may have happened to you when you started doing your podcast. You say, well, I like this. I like having telling people about the trips. But then once you start, you say, okay, there's lots of things to do, lots of things. You have to, well, in your case, I know nothing about this, but you have to um, invest a lot of time and take lots of decisions for having the program that you want to.
Hmm. That's definitely true, but I can guarantee you that it's far easier to do a podcast than to make sherry as you do.
Usually.
So I admire you for all of that and all of the decisions you have to make. I think people kind of understand that there's a lot that goes into winemaking, but it's so interesting to hear you talk about all those elements. Not even the business side of it, but the oak and how burned it is. That's so interesting. I know you have kids too. Do they? But they're on the young side. Do they help out with the
Well,
business at all?
well, I would not say they help with the business, but they help with in the vineyard. They like coming there, and they like helping, and um, and they like coming. So in fact, it's somehow funny because we have like a I have like the role when we are in the vineyard. They think that I give orders in a very strict way, not because I things have to be done as I say. And they usually call me, instead of calling me dad when they are there, they call me patron. That is somehow like the owner of a big farm who has a lot of things that, or a lot of people who have to do what he says, and it's somehow funny. It's like a funny way in the familia of 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 remember how engaged we are at the vineyard and how we like working the farm together. We enjoy that, and we have we have workers there who do the hard work. But there are many things that we do ourselves, and there are many things that we like uh, getting engaged with and seeing. And I love having my kids and my wife also helping me doing things. And the harvesting is somehow the most beautiful part of a farm, because you work hard all the year, and then in a week or 10 days you take all the products. And so it's the sweetest time, because you get what you have been producing. So the rest of the year we have been working there, but and so I like when they come. They have come several years to help me harvesting. And so once they have done that, they also start enjoying coming with me and see how things are growing. Okay, it's in that everything's fine. Okay, well, you have to change these old plants. We are going to plant some new plants, and this is, even though these are old, we are going to keep them because they are still in good health. And so I love them learning how passionate I am with that, and how much I would like them to know about this. I don't know if they will like to follow my steps in this, but I think that it's nice for me that they know how much I love this.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely. And that it's a lineage that they're the third generation now, right? Or fourth. Didn't your great grandfather
Well,
make sherry too?
yes, my great grandfather, who was a worker in bodegas, and not he was not the owner, but he worked there, and he used to in he was somehow the chief of the workers there. And my grandfather was, as my father, a pharmacist, and he was he made clinical analysis, and so he started having his own wine bodega, or sherry bodega, and he started producing wine and make some other things. In fact, for me, it's funny because when I read about, he made some products in those days. Wine could be sold in the pharmacy, and so he made wines with, for example, I don't know, with treatments to some illness in those days. There was a wine with yohimbina. That's something for erectile dysfunction, and he has, it was a mixture that they used to a mixture that he used to produce. And he also made wines for people who had lost their appetite, or it's funny because they made this combination between medicine and wine production. And my father, as I say, he also inherited some wines from my grandfather, and make start producing a bigger wine, a sherry or wine cellar, a sherry bodega. And that's somehow what my father had is somehow the the fountain from which I have drank, I would say. And this is what my father production is what I got from him, is what I have developed to make Lorente y Barba.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Now, the word Jerez literally translates to sherry. So can you explain the history of sherry and the connection to the city?
Yeah. Well, for time it was people thought that sherry was a um, changing of the name that English had done from Jerez. But we know, in fact, there was a common word. The name, the Arab name from this area was cherish. And so Jerez comes from cherish, and sherry comes from sherry. So of course, it's the traduction of the same name. And because the most famous product from this place was this kind of wine, the word sherry in English is known as not so much as the town, but as the product. And as it happens, for example, with Champagne, Bordeaux, sometimes a product is so famous that it becomes even more famous than the town where it comes from. And it happens with sherry. So sherry is the name of this kind of wines that are produced in Jerez, but also in the surroundings, like El Puerto de Santa Maria and Sanlúcar. This somehow, the sherry triangle is the sherry is somehow the name of this wine that we produce here. And it is uh, somehow it's a type of wine that is connected, of course, with this place, and it's also connected with a way of growing, of producing wine that is different to some other places. In most places you have red wines, you have white wines, and they are produced in a way. You have some different wines in different places of the world, but this place in Jerez is produced different, and it is the common things of Jerez is the grape that is grown here. There's a kind of grape that's called Palomino Fino, and also the Pedro Ximenez. Those grapes are somehow the main part. The kind of soil that we have here, it's called albariza. It's a land that is very wide. It has a special good adaptation for the grape and the place where we are, where we have very hot summers, and but it rains quite a lot in the winter, so it keeps humidity because it has a lot of it's a special soil that once was under the water, and it keeps the humidity very well, even though it's dry and very hot in the outside. Once you if you get some 10-15 centimeters, it is still there's a lot of humidity. And if 1 year is very dry, it still keeps some humidity underneath. So this kind of, the place, the soil, the grape is somehow what makes sherry bean what it is. But what it is at the end? Well, it's different kinds of wines regulated and by this place, and also done in a way that is very well defined. We have somehow rules so that you can have a wine that is called sherry. And even though you have some other kind of wines produced in this place and in this soil with this grape, if you don't do things as it is described, you cannot sell it as sherry. So sherry is somehow also a certification that things are done in the way that you can produce sherry. You have several kinds of wines that can be called sherry, and each of them have to be done in a specific way. So you can produce fino, amontillado, palo cortado, all these kinds but all these wines have to be produced exactly in a way. You cannot make a wine in this place. If you make it different, even though you use the same grape, you cannot call it fino and you cannot call it sherry.
It's amazing. Um, so sherry is produced in a very unique way, as you mentioned, and it's very, very different than the typical way of making wine. Can you explain that process?
Well, I think there are quite many things that make sherry different. One of them is that it has some alcohol added once it has stopped its first. When you have the grape juice, and you let it start its fermentation and production of alcohol. After that, you may add some alcohol more so that you get a higher degree, a higher percentage of alcohol. And once you have that, you decide, or say you may introduce it to produce a kind of sherry or another. As I explained, there's a unique way, very unique from this part, that is called biological breeding. We call it is because it's a wine that grows under what we call a veil of flower. That means that we have some yeast that grows on the top of the wine, and it isolates wine from oxygen. So you have this growing in a unique way, very different from most of wines I have known. There are some places in the world where they produce this kind of, or also some kind of wine under yeast, but not exactly as we do here. So this wine that's called what we call fino, or maybe if it gets older, amontillado, that's a kind of sherry. Then we have another kind of sherry in which we add more alcohol from the beginning, so that this cover of yeast is not able to grow. So this wine grows older and oxidates from the beginning. So this is another kind of sherry that's called oloroso. And then we have the sweet wines like Pedro Ximenez, that is made from a different grape and also oxidates from the beginning and has lots of sugar in comparison with the other ones. And the other part that makes sherry very different is the way we age it. Usually you have a wine that you keep from one day. You say, well, I made this wine in 1994 and I grow it older and then I put it in the bottle. So you know that the wine you are drinking comes from exactly the harvest of a year. That is very common, at least when we see it in red wines. And it was also common in Jerez, and has also been done many times to keep a production from a year or from a harvest that is somehow unique, or you wanted to do it that way. But what makes sherry different is that we usually have a barrel that is old, that have a wine that is prepared to be sold and drank, and we place it in the bottom, and we have some barrels stacked in horizontal rows, one over another, and so the lowest one is the solera. We call it solera because suelo. Solera comes from suelo. Suelo means floor. So solera only means, in the beginning it meant that is over the floor. And then you have another rows on the top of it that are the criaderas. And so on the top of, you have the youngest wine. You have a wine that you have added alcohol that is going to be, for example, oloroso. So you have it on the top. You have 5 rows, and this one you have produced it this year. Imagine that you have this produced this year, so you will mix it with the one that is under that. That, for example, imagine that is 3-4 years old. So if you add a third part of it to the second row that was 4 years old, you have extracted the third part that you have put on the other one, on the other one. So every year you extract a part from the bottom line, from the solera, and what you do is, instead of having less and less, you put a third part from the row that was over it. Imagine that it was, if the oldest one is, we'll say 20 years, if you put a third part of that, a third part that is younger, for example, let's say 15 years, once you put 15 years, a third part in the 20 years barrel, it's about, you may say, well, it must be about 18 years and a half, 19 years. So next year it will still be 20. And you take a third part of every row that is over one another. And so it's this solera and criadera, it's a way of producing sherry that somehow makes it be somehow constant. You have a quality that is always the same. Every year you extract a third part, or maybe if it depends on how you produce it, maybe every 2 years you extract a third part of the barrel, or maybe 1/5 part, depending on how you have the scales, the soleras and criaderas. So you take it and you produce a wine that has the same characteristics more or less every year, and that is something very unique. You have an old wine, and you can always produce a wine that is comparable to the one that you produced last year. Somehow we think that in some period of time there could have been a big difference from one year to another, and so maybe one of the buyers said, well, why is this wine so different to the wine from, and somehow somebody made this combination so that you could have the same quality, the same wine every year. And it's a unique way of producing wine. And I think those two things, the way of producing the wine, adding alcohol at the beginning, and growing it under the yeast or over the or without the yeast, and more oxidated, and also the way of mixing it with the younger and the older ones, that is what makes it unique. So different way of producing wine, that somehow it's also the reason why in some places it has more alcohol and it is produced in a different way. So that's why in some markets, instead of wine, they call it sherry as something different. It's not exactly wine, it's made from grapes, but it's called sherry, and it's a different category for taxes are for drinkers. Okay, you have it wines and cherries.
So it sounds like the main reason to do the Solera method is to create consistency. Is that correct? Or is there more reason for doing it than consistency?
Exactly. I think the Solera wines helps you having a constant quality. and you can assure that you don't have all these variations from one year to another depending on the weather on the production. So you can have a very consistent quality. Say this is my wine, and it will not vary because we work on it. We do not depend so much on the year. We can control the quality even more, I would say, than a wine that's made every year. And
So if you had a neighbor, let's say, who has his own vineyard and he's using that and you're all using Palomino grapes and Pedro Jimenez grapes and you're using that same Solera method, what would make his sherries taste different than yours?
well, it's somehow a mystery because even though you have the same wine cellar, inside you somehow notice that some barrels taste slightly different to others, even though you have tried to do, they come exactly from the same place, but there are minimum differences. I think that in the biological aging that I said, when you, it has something to do with how much yeast it has, and somehow small variations may make it uh, tastes slightly different, and also happens in the other seed. Maybe it has something to do with how much air there's crossing, how much somehow some, even though they have done the same, you have the same kind of barrel. One is a bit darker than the other one, and it's somehow it helps us combining with this criaderas and solera. It helps us making the wine having the same solera and having the same production way, but it doesn't make, if you do it you still may have variations from one barrel to another. In fact, for example, in Lorente y Barba, what we do is, instead our production is small, so instead of mixing all the soleras together and having them bottled, what we do is when we have a solera that we like very much, that barrel we take one third. Sometimes we have said, okay, we are going to bottle the whole cask, but usually we say, okay, we take one third of this and we bottle it as we take it from that exact barrel, and we used to say, okay, this is bottle number 72 of the barrel A24, and so if you take another barrel from the A24, it would taste the same, but maybe the another of the barrels of our same wine cellar may taste a little different. It's done in the same way with same people working on it, and say it's, they are very close to each other, but you may still somehow have slight differences.
Okay, interesting. And, you know, something I forgot to ask you was, would you please explain the names of the different sherries and what the characteristics are of each of them, typically?
Yes, of course. As we said, I think I will start doing in for because the I will start doing with the the most classic one. I would say the ones that first started. It was sold as sherry in the beginning, but you may think this is like the origin of the others. Like we are talking about the Amontillado. How was this primer this this primary sherry done? Okay, in those days when you needed a wine that could travel overseas, because in those days, I mean, in the 15th, 17th century, there was no bottles of water, no deposits where you could have water waiting so much time, and so they needed, and it was a wine that could be kept in the boats and to last a long time. So they wanted it to have a higher percentage of alcohol, and sherry was perfect for that. How did they did it? How did they do it? So they what they did was, once they have the the fermentation, they have the barrels those days were a bit thinner than nowadays, and they kept them so that the barrel would evaporate after the fermentation, and it had maybe had become to 14.5, 15 degrees maximum, 50 percentage of alcohol. And so the yeast would grow on the top of it. And after some years, when the concentration of alcohol was over 17.5, 18, this yeast would die. They are not yeast grow very well when the alcohol concentration is low, but as soon as it gets higher, they die. So once this yeast died, the wine that was under this yeast, that we call it the veil of flour, under the yeast it was very pale, but once the yeast died, it started getting oxidated. And so they knew, when it started getting oxidated, they knew that they could put this wine on a boat and it could travel overseas without any problem. In fact, it would not get bad. Moreover, it would get better and better with the time. So this kind of product was called well, we call it now amontillado. In those days, it was called sherry only, or maybe sack, because it was the wine that was taken out of the barrel. And that was somehow the first product. And then later, when wines started to be sold on bottles, somehow they started thinking, okay, instead of waiting so much, we could put, before this yeast dies, before this veil of flour dies, we have this clear wine and we can sell it. It is lighter. It has not so much alcohol, and they start selling it, but it was much later, maybe in the 18th century, and it was before that it was consumed here. That is the fino wine. So the fino is a wine that has grown always under the yeast of flour, so it has a pale color, like nearly, I would say, a light yellow. And the first one I said, the Amontillado, is a wine that once was fino, but then it oxidated and it has been growing. And it mixes this time when it was under the yeast of flour and the time it was oxidated, and it's a bit light brown, I would say. Then you have the oloroso. The oloroso, instead of waiting so much from the beginning, having this wine growing under the yeast of flour, they added more alcohol, and so wine could travel overseas nearly from the beginning. But as soon as it gets older and older and older, it also gets somehow a darker color, and it helps, and it also tastes delicious. It takes even more flavor from the barrel. So that's the oloroso. That's another kind. The oloroso have never been growing under the veil of flour. So we have these three most important kinds: fino, amontillado, and oloroso. And then we have a wine that's made in a different way, that is come from raisins. That is, okay, you have this a grape that is different, that's called Pedro Ximenez. Pedro Ximenez grape concentrates a lot of sugar, and then once you cut it, you let it concentrate even more, because you don't produce the juice until a couple of days, 3 days later, when it is very dry and it has a lot of concentration, and it makes a fermentation. You have alcohol, but this grape always grows with a very high concentration of sugar. And that is, I would say, the fourth most important kind of wine. You can have mixtures of Pedro Ximenez with Oloroso or with Amontillado, and those are the creams. They are sweet, but not as sweet as the Pedro Ximenez. So those are like the major, I would say, branches of sherry.
Okay. Okay. And um and you mentioned cream sherry, um, because that's one of them. And that's the one that most people would be familiar with. And in fact, I brought back a bottle of Oloroso that I bought from you, and we took it to a family gathering, and we were so excited to open it up and introduce everybody to sherry. And all of them were surprised because they were expecting something very sweet. Because the only kind of sherry they'd ever had was cream sherry. And so I started to explain the process and the different subtleties between, the different flavors or the different types of sherry. But can you explain how cream sherry came to be and why so many of us elsewhere in the world are most familiar with that one?
Well, cream sherry was, I think, the Pedro Ximenez are extremely sweet, and it was a wine that mostly was produced to be mixed with, to have a taste that was not only that could not only resist the pass of the time in for traveling, but also something that was drunk uh, for the tea time as an aperitif, and maybe as something sweet that gives some um, energy for the journeys. And it has been since it was started to produce, it became very popular because you can have different kinds, and you mix it with more or less Pedro Ximenez, so you get more sweet or not that much sweet wine. And this cream sherry, the name in fact comes from, for what I have been told, there was a mixture of wines that was sold in Bristol that was called Bristol milk, because it was somehow sweet, and boys started drinking it when they were going, when they went sailing and they were started working at the sea, and so the biggest producer of sherry in Bristol, who used to import barrels of different kinds and mix them, once they had this kind of wine that was, they liked it, especially Manchester. Well, if the others are Bristol milk, this must be Bristol cream, and somehow that's why they started calling it cream. And it was from a owner of a big firma there in Bristol that used to mix wines there and sold it. He bought wines in Spain, and there in Bristol he mixed them to give the special taste he wanted, and that's why the name comes from. But it's true, it's the most sold wines out of Spain. The most sold sherry is the cream sherry, and most people, maybe in Great Britain, in the north of Europe, they expect drinking, when they think about drinking sherry, they think about drinking something that is sweet, and it has also something to do with, okay, sherry is something you can have open for a long time because it has been growing in contact with oxygen. You can have a bottle, you can open it. It's not like other wines, maybe like some kind of liquors. You may open it, having it in a beautiful glass bottle, and once you open, you can be drinking it for months until, and it will not, it will still taste okay. And that made it somehow very popular in the houses of the United States, the England, the north of Europe, and that's maybe the reason why instead of having a tea at 5 o'clock, they would have maybe a glass of sherry, and it made it very popular.
Hmm. It's so interesting. Now you talked about the veil of the floor, the veil of floor, the yeast layer on
Yes.
top, and we kept having this wonderful dessert, including at your place, that has a very interesting connection to that yeast. So can you explain what that story is and what the dessert is?
Yes, when you, okay, you, we have to try to think in the old times, and now things are industrialized, and the production has, well, many solutions that were impossible to imagine some centuries ago. When when you produce sherry, let's say 300 years ago, when you produce wine, not only sherry, when you produce wine, you have substances that are floating over the wine, and you have substances that are very heavier than the wine, so they come to the bottom. But you have also substances that are, or particles that weight as much as wine, so they are inside. They're inside, and if you bottle them, you will see that it's not, the liquid is not that clear. So what did they use? They did somehow. It's always something for me. It's incredible. How could someone think about this? But they have these cylinders that were big cylinders, maybe like 1.5 or 2 meters wide and very high, and they put the white of the egg. They make like an omelette only with the white of the egg. They once they have once they mix it very fine together, and they put it on the top of this cylinder that was filled with wine, and they make. this circle so that it could, with this white of the egg, they would occupy the whole surface of the wine. So, what is the white of the egg? The white of the egg is albumin. And we know that albumin is a protein filter. So, it is a filter that is incredibly fine. And this albumin weighs a little bit more than the wine. So, once they made this surface of albumin covering the wine, it will somehow stick to the walls of the cylinder and very slowly will be going down. Very slowly, because this fine filter will allow very clean wine come through this wall that was going down and down like a parachute. It has this uh, convex form, and it will go down. And once it get down, you have all the small particles that would be um, disturb somehow the look of the wine. They would be at the bottom, and so you could extract the wine over this layer of albumin, and you took extremely clean uh, wine. And that is something amazing, because this is extremely fine filter. That kind of filter cannot be used now. You cannot use an animal product to produce wine. Now we have, you can choose the material or in which you want to filter, and you know exactly how wide this the holes of the filter, how much, how big they will be. But that was a very perfect way of filtering wine, I would say. But what happened once you have this kind of production, that was very funny. You use a lot of the white part of the egg, but you have thousands of yellow part of the egg. So what would they do with that? So they have a product there that was, of course, it could be used, but they didn't. The bodegas were not interested, so they gave it to the nuns, and so in the clusters, and the nuns started making a product mixing this yellow of the egg with water, and so they produced a product that was very common, cheap, because the main part was given by free by the from came from the bodegas, and it became very popular, not only in Jerez but also in some other places where wine was produced, and because it was somehow fatty and it came from the nuns, from the clusters. It's called tocino de cielo. That could be translated somehow like bacon from heaven or something like that. And that's why it's a popular dessert. And I think that when people come from outside, I want them to taste it. But maybe the same idea that I have is we may many people think you cannot go out, you cannot come being here several years and not taste this. But the problem is that if we all think about that, you may taste it several times.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not such a bad thing. It's
Uh,
so delicious. So it's basically like a custard. It's egg yolk and sugar and anything else?
I think
Is
that
water
is the
maybe?
main ingredient. Then you use caramel as well,
Mm-hmm.
but and sometimes they use um, cream. Some people use some cream on the top,
Mm-hmm.
but the main part is that is the yellow of the egg and the sugar.
It's so creamy and delicious. I have a question about the egg yolk or the egg white. Did they put it on there raw or did they cook it somehow? Because you
No.
mentioned like an omelet.
You cannot cook it. You have to put it on a
Okay.
raw, because if it's like if you were doing a when you butter the eggs. You say when
Uh-huh.
you need to make a surface that covers the whole 1.5 or 2 meters diameter cylinder. You cover it and it goes inside. So you need it to be very well mixed so that you make this kind of fine protein filter.
And what did you say they do now since
you
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 can't use
you
animal
can
products?
use that. You have a product with we use physical filters, and instead, in fact, we what we do now is For example, our wines, we only use a filter to separate in case there's something floating or something that is as heavy as wines in the inside, that you cannot have it on the bottle. But we don't. You nowadays you filter the when you put it. There's not. I mean, you when you have a physical filter, you say, okay, I have a filter of this so small that you see it transparent. You see it's nothing comes across it.
Hmm, very interesting. So when someone is visiting Jerez de la Frontera, where can they go to taste sherry, especially if they're unfamiliar with it?
Well, I think in Jerez there are many restaurants, bars, and where you can taste it. And there are some kind of what we call tabancos. Tabancos are somehow a special kind of bar specialized in sherry wines, and that is a fantastic place to try it. And in the center of the town, there are many places where you can have it, and they will also. I think people will be happy to tell you how to pair it with something, with kind of sherry to drink. Say, well, I what you may ask, what kind of sherry should I drink now, or what would you recommend me? And say, well, if, for example, in a hot day now in summer, I'm sure they will say, okay, let's have some fino. That's usually served fresh. Maybe in autumn or in winter, they say, okay, I have here an oloroso with some little higher percentage of alcohol, and that's perfect now. Depending also what you are going to have for eating, I think they would recommend you. And when you know not too much about some kind of products, maybe the best thing to do is to ask and get some recommendation from someone who would also like you to learn about it.
Okay. And what kinds of foods do go well with sherry?
Well, as we have said, when we you were here also, we tried different kinds of sherry, and as if we have been talking, some wines are have different kind of uh, maturing, and some are sweet, some are extremely dry. So it depends a little of what kind of sherry are you drinking. I would say maybe I would say there's nearly a chance for a different sherry with every dish you can think about. For example, I think fino pairs fantastically with things that are a bit acid, or with of fish taste. For example, with shrimps, with sushi, with it pairs really well. Oloroso is a wine that I love with um, most sausages here. Like in Spain, we have this chorizo that we tasted, and we have this ham and cheeses. Oloroso pairs really well with that. And if you have a fish that is extremely tasty, and you like, maybe you need a strong amontillado would pair fantastically with that. And we tried for example, the palo cortado is also has a bit more alcohol. It pairs very well with things with a little of paprika, and with maybe with some. You may choose a different sherry from different things. And for example, the sweet sherries may pair incredibly with something you may even don't expect, like, for example, with um, strong cheeses, or something that are extremely spicy. It makes a contrast. Pairing wines and food has somehow, I also, it's like somehow like music. Sometimes you make a chord and say, how these notes combine very well together. And even though it depends on how you mix them, they may pair very well. I think sherry has I would say, it's somehow a big opportunity now. That's so much people enjoying. Now we have like two moves. One is fast food and trying to everything very fast, and there are lots of people concentrating. Like, I want to know what I'm drinking. I want to know what I'm eating. I want to enjoy this taste. It's not only that I have 10 minutes to eat, but I want to know. I want to enjoy this meal together. I want to prepare this. I want to find something different, and sherry there has a great opportunity. And sometimes some vegetables that how could I combine this with the wine? And sherry may be a perfect opportunity.
Very interesting. Now, how can people learn more about your company, Lorente y Barba, and where can they purchase bottles of your sherry?
Well, now in the we do not export to United States right now. Here in Jerez, there are several places where they can buy it, and also they can ask for sherry in our in our website is now how it is not working right now, but it will be working, I hope, next week. And of course they can order them, and I think we are looking forward to have an imported in the United States. And as soon as we have it, I will put it also in our website, because well, we are growing, as I said, little by little. And United States is a place where I would love to be. And I would also, I think it's there's I would love to be there and to be able to explain, to give the sherry to be known there. And our branch is, I think we have lots of combinations that can be done. But now we don't have that important. We are looking forward to close deal with him, and once we do it, we'll put it in our website. And here in Jerez, they can order it directly on the website, or they can write me an email, and I can send it to all over Europe.
Now, I know as travel writers, we get to do some special things that the general public might not get to do. And we got to come to your vineyard and take the horse-drawn carriage through it and see I don't know how many acres of beautiful vineyard you have, but it was just beautiful, all these undulating fields. But can the average visitor come and see your vineyards like we did and taste and buy bottles there?
Yes, of course. If they come here, they can contact me in this through website, or maybe through this email that's that I gave you. This Mauri Jerez. That's my name, and Jerez. Mauri Jerez. It's only gmail.com. And they can contact me. I would happily arrange traveling through the vineyards, as I did with you. But the thing is that it has to be a group, and or depending on how big it is, what do they want, we can arrange it. It depends on if they want a whole experience with lunch or whatever they want. We can adapt ourselves to that.
Okay. All right. Are you on social media currently?
Not that much. We have that website I told you, and we don't we that's something we have to work on. But we are not used to that right now.
Right. We always have an article on our website that goes with our podcasts, and there's even a little way to click and listen to this podcast. So if it's all right with you, I will include your email address in that article so people can write to you. And if you would, when the website is up, will you let me know and I'll include the website and a live link to that on the article as well?
Thank you very much. That would be nice.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
great. Great. Well, this is the point in the podcast where I always remind everybody that you can stream our podcast pretty much anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts. But as I said, we always have them on the realfoodtraveler.com website with an article. And there, I haven't even shown you, Mauricio, that I took so many wonderful pictures of you the day we were there. And I'm going to include a few of them. And I have a great picture of you holding some of the soil that you talked about, that special white soil that holds in the humidity so well. And you're pointing to one of the old vines, one of the oldest ones you have there. And I have a great picture of you and your wife after we had a wonderful tasting and lunch. So I'll share those pictures with you, but I'm going to put them in the article so everybody can see who I've been talking to today and get a feel for where we were and what your operation looks like. So thank you so much for your time today. I know it's morning here for me in Colorado. It's evening for you there in Jerez. At the end of your long, busy day as a doctor, that you're taking the time to talk to me about your wonderful sherries. So it was a pleasure to meet you in Jerez de la Frontera, and I encourage everybody to go visit and to contact you. And I just loved your sherries. I loved your enthusiasm. It was a wonderful experience. So thank you for sharing it all with us.
Okay, you always ask of what you are watching, what you get back. For me, it was really such also a good experience to have you here. I learned a lot of people who were so interested in learning, who were so clear about what they were interested in, and for me, it was a great experience to have you here as well. And it's for me really a pleasure to see you again and to share my time with you in your podcast. It's for me, it's really fantastic.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you to all of our listeners. Join us again next time for more tasty travels. Take care, Mauricio.
Thank you.